Content warning: this story contains mentions of poverty, child abandonment, abuse, and sexual assault. Reader discretion is advised. Ifunanya huddled under the bridge, shivering as the cold rain soaked through her tattered clothes. At just 15 years old, she was alone in the world, with no one to turn to and nowhere to call home. As she closed her eyes, trying to escape into sleep, she wondered how her life had come to this. Chidi wiped the sweat from his brow as he trudged home after another long day of backbreaking work. His muscles ached, but the pain in his empty stomach was even worse. He'd spent hours hauling heavy sacks at the market, but the shopkeeper had refused to pay him, claiming business was slow. Now he had nothing to show for his efforts, not even a few coins to buy food for his beloved daughter Ifunanya. As he neared their small, run-down shack on the outskirts of the village, Chidi's heart lifted at the thought of seeing his little girl's smiling face. 5-year-old Ifunanya was the light of his life, the only thing that kept him going through the daily struggles of poverty. Her mother had abandoned them years ago, leaving Chidi to raise the child alone. It wasn't easy, but Ifunanya's laughter and innocence made it all worthwhile. Chidi pushed open the rickety door, calling out, "Ifunanya, Papa is home." The little girl came running, throwing her arms around his legs. "Papa, I'm so happy you're back. I'm hungry, did you bring any food?" Chidi's heart clenched. He knelt down, pulling Ifunanya into a tight hug. "I'm sorry, my sweet one. There's no food today. But don't worry, we'll find something." Ifunanya's face fell, but she nodded bravely. "It's okay, Papa. Maybe the neighbors will share." Chidi hated having to beg, but he had no choice. Holding Ifunanya's hand, he went door to door, asking if anyone had any leftover food to spare. Most turned them away, barely having enough for their own families. Finally, one kind woman gave them a small portion of fufu and a bit of soup. It wasn't much, but Chidi made sure Ifunanya ate most of it. As he watched her devour the meager meal, he felt a sharp pang in his chest. His little girl deserved so much better than this life of constant hunger and want. He vowed to keep working hard, to do whatever it took to give her a brighter future. Days turned into weeks, and Chidi's situation grew more desperate. Work was scarce, and what little he earned was barely enough to keep them alive. There were times when they went days without a proper meal, subsisting on whatever scraps they could find. One morning, weak from hunger and exhaustion, Chidi collapsed while walking in the fields. By the time someone found him and carried him home, it was too late. Chidi's tired body had finally given out, leaving little Ifunanya an orphan. The village elders gathered to decide the child's fate. With no one in the community able to take on another mouth to feed, they reached out to Chidi's distant relatives. An aunt in Lagos agreed to take Ifunanya in, promising to raise her as her own. Ifunanya cried as she was taken away from the only home she'd ever known. She didn't understand why her papa wasn't waking up, or why she had to live with this stern-faced woman she'd never met. As the bus pulled away from the village, Ifunanya pressed her face against the window, watching her old life disappear into the distance. Life in Lagos was nothing like Ifunanya had imagined. Instead of the loving home her aunt had promised, she found herself treated like a servant. From dawn to dusk, she was forced to cook, clean, and take care of her cousins. Any mistake was met with harsh words and even harsher blows. Years passed, and Ifunanya's spirit began to break under the constant abuse. She clung to fading memories of her father's love, but it grew harder to remember his face or the sound of his voice. On her 15th birthday, after a particularly brutal beating, Ifunanya made a decision. She couldn't live like this anymore. In the dead of night, she slipped out of the house with nothing but the clothes on her back. The streets of Lagos were terrifying, full of dangers she could barely imagine. But anything seemed better than the hell she was leaving behind. For weeks, Ifunanya wandered the city, begging for food and sleeping wherever she could find shelter. She was always hungry, always afraid. One night, huddled under a bridge, she was attacked by a group of thugs. Just as she thought all hope was lost, a young man named Ifunanya appeared, fighting off her attackers. Ifunanya seemed like an answer to her prayers. He offered her a safe place to stay and even helped her find a job as a salesgirl in a small restaurant. For the first time in years, Ifunanya dared to hope that things might get better. But her newfound peace was shattered one night when she returned home exhausted from work. Half asleep, she didn't hear Ifunanya enter her room. She woke to find him on top of her, his hand over her mouth to muffle her screams. The one person she had trusted had betrayed her in the worst way possible. Broken and desperate, Ifunanya fled once again. This time, she had nowhere left to run. She found herself in the poorest part of the city, surrounded by others like her, the forgotten, the unwanted, those who had slipped through society's cracks. It was there, in her darkest moment, that Ifunanya's life took an unexpected turn. An old woman named Mama Adana ran a small shelter for girls who had nowhere else to go. She took one look at Ifunanya's haunted eyes and opened her arms. "Come, child," Mama Adana said gently. "You're safe now." For the first time since her father died, Ifunanya felt a glimmer of hope. Mama Adana offered not just a roof over her head, but understanding and compassion. Slowly, surrounded by other girls who had faced similar hardships, Ifunanya began to heal. Mama Adana believed in education as a path out of poverty. She encouraged the girls to attend night classes and learn practical skills. Ifunanya threw herself into her studies, determined to create a better life for herself. Years passed, and Ifunanya's hard work paid off. She earned a scholarship to university, studying to become a social worker. Her experiences had given her a deep empathy for others who were struggling, and she wanted to help children who were in the same situation she had once been in. After graduating, Ifunanya started working at a non-profit organization that helped street children. She found purpose in her work, using her own story to connect with kids who felt hopeless. Slowly but surely, she built a life for herself, a small apartment, good friends, and a job that gave her satisfaction. One day, while working on a case, Ifunanya came across a familiar face. It was her mother, now old and worn, living on the streets. The years had not been kind to her. Addiction and poor choices had left her with nothing. Ifunanya's first instinct was anger. This was the woman who had abandoned her, who had set in motion the chain of events that led to so much suffering. But as she looked at the broken woman before her, Ifunanya felt something unexpected: pity. She knelt down beside her mother. "Do you know who I am?" she asked softly. The older woman squinted, confusion in her roomy eyes. "Should I? I'm Ifunanya. Your daughter." A flicker of recognition passed over her mother's face, followed by shame. "Ifunanya. My baby. I'm so sorry. I was young and stupid. I thought you'd be better off without me." Ifunanya took a deep breath. "What's done is done. But you need help, and I can offer that. Will you let me?" It wasn't easy. Her mother's road to recovery was long and difficult. There were setbacks and disappointments. But Ifunanya remained patient, drawing on the kindness Mama Adana had shown her all those years ago. As she helped her mother heal, Ifunanya found herself healing too. The last pieces of bitterness in her heart began to melt away. She would never forget the hardships she had endured, but she refused to let them define her. Ifunanya's work with street children gained recognition. She was invited to speak at conferences, sharing her story to inspire change. She used her platform to advocate for better support systems for vulnerable children and families. One day, after a particularly moving speech, a young man approached her. He introduced himself as Obina, a successful businessman who had grown up in similar circumstances to Ifunanya. He was touched by her story and wanted to support her work. As they talked, Ifunanya felt a connection she had never experienced before. Obinna understood her in a way no one else could. Their shared experiences created a bond that grew stronger with each meeting. Slowly, cautiously, Ifunanya allowed herself to open her heart. Obinna was patient and kind, never pushing her beyond what she was comfortable with. For the first time, she experienced a relationship built on mutual respect and understanding. Years passed, and Ifunanya's life blossomed in ways she never could have imagined as that scared little girl on the streets of Lagos. She married Obinna in a joyful ceremony, surrounded by friends who had become family. Mama Adana was there, beaming with pride at the strong woman Ifunanya had become. Together, Ifunanya and Obinna expanded her work, opening a network of shelters and education centers for street children across Nigeria. They named the first one after Chidi, honoring the father whose love had given Ifunanya the strength to survive. Ifunanya never forgot where she came from. She made it a point to visit the village where she was born, using her resources to help improve life for the community there. She thought often of her father, hoping that wherever he was, he could see that his sacrifices had not been in vain. As she cradled her firstborn child, a daughter she named Olana, Ifunanya marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. Life had not been easy, but she had persevered. Now, looking into her daughter's eyes, she made a silent promise. Olana would know love, safety, and opportunity, all the things Ifunanya had once thought were beyond her reach. Ifunanya's story became a beacon of hope for others facing seemingly insurmountable odds. She proved that with determination, compassion, and a little help along the way, it was possible to rise above even the darkest circumstances. As for her mother, she found peace in her final years, working alongside Ifunanya to help other women trapped in cycles of addiction and poverty. While they could never reclaim the years they had lost, they forged a new relationship based on mutual understanding and forgiveness. Ifunanya's life was far from perfect. There were still challenges and difficult days. But when she looked back on how far she had come, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had not only survived but thrived, turning her pain into purpose and creating ripples of positive change that would continue long after she was gone. In the end, Ifunanya realized that true happiness wasn't about erasing the past or pretending the hard times never happened. It was about finding meaning in the struggle, about using her experiences to lift others up. As she tucked Olana into bed each night, Ifunanya whispered the words her father had once said to her. "You are strong. You are loved. And your life has purpose." And in those simple truths, Ifunanya found the happiness deeper and more enduring than she had ever dreamed possible. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to our YouTube channel, like, and comment, click on the link below.